Hi artists! Today we are going to be doing some paper weaving. So the main thing you're going to need today is paper and maybe a ruler, maybe some scissors, and maybe a marker or pencil or something that you can draw some lines with. Let me show you a few of the types of paper that I collected to do this project. I have a lined notebook. I have some junk mail, recycling a little bit of those ads, and I also have some colored paper. So let me show you a couple of examples of what we're going to be doing today so that you kind of have an idea. On this first one I actually just used, I used a piece of scratch paper that I had kind of to practice to weave, and I used some colored paper here, and I also used some of my recycled mail that I have, and I added a few little details with markers. If you'd like to do that at the end, you absolutely can do that. Oh, which reminds me, you might want a glue stick or some tape or something to glue down these edges. Like on this one, I haven't finished this one off yet. I have everything woven in, but I need to trim these edges off and then glue them down, because otherwise these little guys, you can pull them right out. So those are two that you can do absolutely on your own. I'm going to give you some easy tips and tricks so that you can create those. And then I'm going to give you some templates. Some templates, they show you some ideas and give you exact places to weave in and out and in and out. So one that I have for you today is this very simple, easy in and out. You can see the X's on here are kind of like a checkerboard, and this is going to give you a similar result as this one, except your pieces are going to be more uniform because you're going to need to cut them to about an inch. Your weaving strips are going to be cut to about an inch so that they fit in this template. And then I have a few that are a little bit trickier, but they come out with some absolutely gorgeous results. So here's one that I have started myself. This uses 1/2 inch strips. So I actually have a little pile of 1/2 inch pieces that I cut out already that I've been working on this one, and it's a little bit hard to see what it's going to be now, but I'm sure it's going to turn out great. Now with these, especially with these smaller templates, and some of these you can kind of start to see, I'm not sure if you can see that blue one from there, but the green you might be able to see a little bit of what the design might look like. It's really important that you're accurate cutting these lines for your weaving board and your weaving pieces that you're going to be using. They're going to need to be about 1/2 inch, and if they're bigger, it really is not going to work because everything's going to get kind of off kilter, and then by the time you get to probably the 10th row or so, it's going to be taking up extra space. If they're a little bit smaller, that's probably okay, but I just want you to know that before you get started, that it's going to take more time if you choose to do one of these. However, it's going to be an absolutely gorgeous result. Now, the last thing, you're gonna have access to these templates, and you might not be able to print them. That's okay. This is gonna take even a little bit longer, but it's going to be worth it. Trust me. You can actually draw this onto your paper. So once you see this idea, or if you have your own idea that you would like to try, you can use a ruler and you can draw out a template with pencil or pen or marker on your paper and put these X's in here so that you know where your weaving pieces, where the strips need to cover. That's what these show. Everywhere there's an X, the weaving strip needs to cover that X. You can draw those on your own. You don't have to print these ones out. You don't have to use the ones that I have. These are just some options to make things a little bit more challenging for you. So let's go ahead and get started doing a little bit of weaving. Once you have your supplies ready, we will get started. Grab a piece of paper that you would like to use. I'm starting with a piece of scratch paper. Go ahead and fold it in half. Make sure all of your edges are lined up carefully. And when we're cutting our weaving board, we can't cut all the way through the piece of paper. We want to keep it together. So I'm drawing a line across the top of my paper to tell me how far I can cut. And then I'm drawing some lines to show me where I should cut my weaving board. And I'm just using the width of the ruler. You can use the width of a ruler, you could use a notebook or something also to draw those lines. And then we're gonna go ahead and cut each of those, and I'm stopping at that line at the top of my paper so that when I open up my paper, I have a little weaving board. Now, when we're just doing a practice board, you can just cut your strips any shape. I used some different scraps of paper that I had. You can cut them straight or you can cut them with zigzags. And the most important thing as you're weaving, we're doing the basic weaving pattern. We go over one piece, under the next piece, over one, under one. Then we get to the next row, it's going to be opposite. So I marked an X on my paper where I needed to cover up my paper. That would help me remember that on this yellow strip, I need to weave it opposite of the pink. And usually you're going to have to weave it a little bit lower than where it's going to end up. But you can see it's going to start to look like a checkerboard. And I went through on each of my weaving strips and I put an X mark where I needed my strip to cover so that I knew where I needed to go over and where I needed to go under. The closer you get to the bottom, it's going to get a little bit trickier, but just take your time and you can go ahead and do it. And the last thing I did, I glued down the edge of each of my strips to the edge of my weaving board. That way they stay in place once I'm done with my creation. After they're glued down, you can take your scissors and trim off the extra. And you will have your weaving done. I grabbed a marker so I could just add a little bit of detail into my project. You could choose to do this or you can leave it the way it is. I'm also going to show you, if you use a lined piece of paper, it makes it super easy to cut your weaving board because the lines are already there. So that is also a great choice. Let me show you one more example of a weaving board. With this one, I just drew my line so I knew how far up to cut, but then instead of cutting straight lines, I cut zigzag lines, I cut curvy lines, I cut cloud lines, which adds a nice little twist to your weaving board. Even though the weaving board has a different pattern in it, you still use the same weaving pattern if you're going for the basic style. The over, under, it's going to turn out kind of like a checkerboard. But when you choose to add those wavy and curvy lines, it makes a neat pattern in your final project. And you want to try to fill it up all the way to the edge. There you go. Now I'm going to have these available for my class, a few templates. So this just gives you an idea of how you can weave. And
if you can print these, that is fine, or you can draw this onto a piece of paper, these patterns. But with these patterns, you're going to cut on the dotted line. And similarly to before, when I drew my own X's on my paper, you are going to cover the X's on these. Now, one thing that's important with a template is that your strips of paper need to be more exact. So I cut my strips into 1-inch strips. So it took me a little bit to make sure that all of my strips were cut into one uniform width. Still, it doesn't matter what you use. I grabbed some of my old newspapers here, but they need to be uniform. That means the same. Now, here is another example. This one's a little bit more tricky, and it shows a different pattern. So you can see this is not over, under, over, under. This one has a different tricky pattern to it, but if you'd like to try it, I challenge you to do that. So wherever there's an X, you're going to cover the X. Wherever it is a blank space, you're going to leave it uncovered. And just carefully weave those pieces through. And like I said before, you could print these, or if you want to try it yourself, this would be a great pattern to put onto a notebook.
Artists, I hope you have fun working on some weaving projects today. And just remember, when you're weaving, you can always take those pieces back out. You don't have to glue them in until the end. Really, you don't ever have to glue them in. But remember, we're going over, under, and then the next piece that comes in is going to be the exact opposite of the first one that we did. So I cannot wait to see some of your creations. Have fun.